They fired me at 9 in the morning with coffee still hot in the paper cup. The new owner, hair too perfect, watch too bright, sat at the head of the conference table like a tenant who'd mistaken the lease for the deed. He didn't know the carpet he was standing on belonged to me. Not yet. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. Henry, he said, we appreciate your years of service. It's time to modernize. You'll get a very generous package. For a second, the room went out of focus. 50 years measures itself oddly, by birthdays in the break room, by the smell of oil on a cold January morning, by the weight of someone's hand on your shoulder when a machine stops singing. I watched my own hands stay steady around the coffee. My picture was on the wall in the lobby. Me at 20, me at 40, me at 65, still standing beside the first press we installed, steel ribs and bolts like a cathedral. I trained 3 generations here. I knew which line manager could hear a bearing cry through earplugs. I knew which forklift to coax with a joke before it would turn left. You don't modernize something like that. You either tend it like a garden or you pave it. Modernize, I repeated. Is that what you told Frank when you took his chair? Frank, who started the company with a second-hand press and a handshake from a bank manager who believed in calluses. The new owner smiled. I told him we'd make the brand stronger. Streamline. Create value. I thought of the meeting 3 nights earlier in a hot room over a bakery that never slept, sugar in the air and flour on the floor. A quiet lawyer, a notarized packet, a signature that had waited for decades inside a promise. I'd slid an envelope across the table and watched a widow's shoulders drop for the first time since Frank died. She'd squeezed my hand and said, "He trusted you most, Henry." He said, "If I can't hold it anymore, let him." Now the new owner pushed a folder at me. A printed sheet. A severance number meant to feel like mercy. My name misspelled. He tapped the page with a gold pen. "I'll need your badge." 2 vice presidents avoided my eyes. One had a son in carpentry school. Another had a mortgage newly refinanced. I scanned their cheeks for shame and found calculation instead. I understood that. Survival teaches people strange arithmetic. "Was this your idea?" I asked the new owner. "To fire me first?" He glanced at the HR director. "We're restructuring." "We don't need a shop historian. We need speed." I heard the stamping line in my head, the lift of the die, the kiss of metal, the heartbeat you feel through your boots. I heard the way a good crew accelerates by listening, not whipping. "Speed," I said, "so you can sell it faster?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Boxes were moving in the hallway. A team with clipboards was measuring the conference room table as if it might fetch a price. The company had been purchased by a fund with numbers for a last name. Their job wasn't to build, it was to slice. How could a boy who never fixed a jammed feeder tell men who bled on the floor how to work? I wondered silently. Out loud I said, "I should thank you." He blinked. "For what?" "For showing me who's in the room." I nodded at the vice presidents, the HR director, the assistant who was taking notes like dictation might save her. "It saves time." His smile returned. "I like you, Henry." "But the clock has to move forward." "It has," I said. 3 days forward." He didn't catch it. He reached for my badge. I let him see my hand hesitate. Then I set the badge on the table like a chip at a high-stakes table. The gold pen glinted. He slid the badge toward himself as if possession made authority. He was young enough to think that. The painful part wasn't the insult. Pain is older than pride. The painful part was picturing the crew learning from a memo that the old man was gone, and then watching a stranger open the lockout cabinet as if red tags were decoration. I imagined Ricky from Line 2, limp from a ladder spill years ago, watching a supervisor he didn't trust, Tell him to run 70 strokes per minute when we all knew 65 kept fingers human. I saw Maria, who could hear a misalignment like a mother hears a baby breathe, getting told to ignore soft alarms to meet targets. Targets, as if plates were game you shot from a blind. I stared at the new owner's hand on my badge. "You want speed," I said. "You'll have it." "What does that mean?" "It means the board meets on Friday," he laughed. "We control the board now." "Do you," I asked, "control the votes?" He stopped laughing. His eyes checked the faces around the table. No one told him what I knew. No one knew. That was the point. I stood, took my coffee, and left my badge in his palm like a borrowed coin. In the hallway, the moving crew paused to let me pass. Old habit. Respect. I lifted my cup in thanks. My reflection in the lobby glass looked like my father the day the plant where he labored shut down with a 2-sentence sign on the door. He came home with his lunch untouched and a dent in his hat. He lived 6 more months. Worry is a slow poison. I promised myself at 20 I would never let worry kill men who worked for me. Promises are heavy, but they balance you. On the wall, my 3 photographs watched me go. I touched the frame of the oldest, the kid with too much hair and a grin like a dare. "Hold on," I told him. "We're not done." The receptionist mouthed, "I'm sorry." I shook my head. Not her fault. Not yet. Outside, the air smelled like rain. A city truck rattled past. My phone buzzed. A message from the quiet lawyer. Documents recorded. Effective 12:01 a.m. 3 days ago. I smiled. When you spend a lifetime building something, you learn the difference between possession and ownership. Possession makes noise. Ownership doesn't need to. On the curb, I asked myself a question I'd once asked at a different turning. How do you dismantle a man who thinks your home is just his next trade? You don't swing at the hand. You cut the wrist that holds the pen. Friday would come with chairs around a long table. Yes. It would come with bright watches and thick folders. It would come with faces that perform confidence until they are forced to perform contrition. It would come with votes. And it would come with something else I'd carried for 50 years, the kind of thing men forget exists until it's laid in front of them like a blueprint. A promise written not on paper, but in the things we won't sell. If revenge is a dish best served cold, I had the walk-in ready. I just needed to set the plates. I met the company when it was nothing but hope, a second-hand press, and a warehouse that leaked. Frank, the founder, broke risks down the way machinists break down parts. He sized, he measured, he cut, he tested. When we lost a contract, he put on the shop coat and stood at the line with me until we found a way to shave a second without shaving a finger. He made me a foreman at 27 because I could see a jam 10 strokes before it happened. He made me a partner in spirit, if not on paper, by asking my counsel at midnight and taking my calls at dawn. That's why he put a clause in the bylaws that most men in suits filed under curiosities. It wasn't curiosity, it was a trapdoor above a fire. In the event of a controlling interest changing hands without the consent of the original operating committee, it said, voting rights attached to any transferred shares shall be subject to a right of first refusal held jointly by the founding operators désignés and any employee trust existing at the time of transfer. Founding operators désignés, employee trust. Plain words for a stubborn idea. Companies are not only numbers. They are people who remember birthdays in the break room and names on toolboxes. We set up the trust in 1988 when we were flush from a defense contract, and Frank was feeling immortal. We never dissolved it. We just stopped talking about it, the way you stop talking about a fire extinguisher when you haven't had a fire. 3 days before they fired me, I sat in that hot room over the bakery and bought the voting rights that slipped loose when the fund acquired the shell around the company, not the load-bearing wall itself. Frank's widow cried when I explained it, not because of money, Because she'd spent years watching men in clean shoes explain to her what her husband's work meant, while she still knew which night he came home with oil under his nails and said, "I found the sound." We signed, we notarized, we recorded. Ownership doesn't give a speech. It files. I didn't tell a soul. Not because I'm a secretive man, because I wanted to see who would reach for the knife when the lights went out. When they fired me, I saw. The second hook came hard and fast 2 hours after the meeting, when a line supervisor I'd trained sent me a picture of a memo taped to the time clock. Pension freeze effective immediately. It was dated that day, signed by the new owner. I called the number on the memo. It went to a voicemail that called itself Benefits Optimization, with a voice too cheerful for what it did. I drove back to the plant, past the security booth where Eddie lifted his chin at me like always, and then checked himself, remembering maybe he shouldn't. I rolled down the window. "Just returning my parking pass," I said. Eddie slipped me a manila envelope under the glass. No words. Inside, printed copies of emails. Subject lines that crawled across my skin. Asset sale timing. Defined benefit conversion strategy. Q4 headcount benefit. Every word a knife with a spreadsheet for a handle. And a final one. Auction list. Surplus machinery, with pictures of the 2 presses that still listened when you spoke to them. Lot numbers. A date. They hadn't fired me to modernize. They fired me to silence a witness. I called Maria. "Take pictures of the time clock memo," I said, "without you in the frame." She hesitated. "Henry, are you okay?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Do it. Then send them from your cousin's phone, not yours." I called the quiet lawyer. "We have a new urgency," I said. "The board meeting is set," he said. 30 hours. "Good," I said. "I need 20 of them to make a few calls." I started with the union steward. He didn't trust me for years. He thought any foreman was a spy. Then we had coffee after one too many funerals and found we were arguing for the same thing from opposite trenches. Men coming home with the same number of fingers they left with, and a retirement that didn't feel like punishment. When I told him about the memo, he didn't swear. He went quiet. "We never saw that," he said. "You will," I said, "in a room where the minutes are recorded." I called the banker who once approved Frank's first line of credit. He was retired now, but a retired banker keeps his phone like a priest keeps his confessional. "Henry," he said, "I heard about the sale." "You heard the headline," I said. "I'm calling about the footnote." I explained the clause, the trust, the recording. He chuckled once in the way a man chuckles when he recognizes a move he taught a younger man. "You always did read the last page first," he said. "Do you need me in that room?" "I need you to remind a junior counsel of what words mean," I said. "Words like fiduciary and bad faith." "I can do that." By midnight, my kitchen table looked like it had when my kids were small and science projects took over dinner. Stacks, highlighters, a legal pad bleeding through with lists. My grandson texted to ask if I was awake. "Always," I sent back. He replied with a thumbs up. Not my language, but I took it as a blessing. At 2 in the morning, I walked to the garage and laid my palm on the hood of the truck that had carried me to 1,000 dawns. I told the empty street the thing I hadn't said even in my head. I was scared. Not of losing a job. Of losing the thing a job becomes when you give it half a century. An identity you wear like a coat even when it's July. But fear sharpens a man who knows what it's for. It isn't a stop sign. It's a level. You set it on the beam, and if the bubble moves, you adjust. By 10 the next morning, I'd gathered more than paper. I'd gathered people. Eddie from the booth with his envelope, Maria with her ear for machines and her eye for liars, Ricky with the limp and the stubborn courage to say no to a faster stroke rate when a slower one saved tendons, the union steward with a binder of names, each one a life that had traded hours for food and dignity. And Frank's widow, small and fierce, ready to sit in a chair facing men who assumed she couldn't read a balance sheet until she recited it from memory. We walked into the boardroom on Friday as if we were walking into a church whose doors we had funded and whose pews we had sanded. The new owner had filled the room with suits. You could tell which ones were paid to agree by the way they laughed before the joke. He looked up when I entered, and the smile climbed back onto his face like a cat finding a warm car hood. "Henry," he said, extending a hand as if to a guest at a barbecue. "Here to say goodbye properly?" I shook his hand. "Here to vote." "Vote?" He glanced at the corporate secretary, at two lawyers whose watches cost more than my first house. "You're not on the board." "I am," I said, setting a folder on the table. "By designee of the founding operator." He laughed then, too loudly. "That clause is obsolete." "Obsolete," I repeated. "Like the promise of a pension?" Several heads turned, the way people turn when a glass breaks in a restaurant. The quiet lawyer took the seat beside me and pushed his glasses up his nose, as if adjusting focus. He slid copies of the recorded documents across the table. "As of 12:01 a.m. 3 days ago," he said, "the Employee Trust, represented by Mr. Avery as designee of the founding operator, exercised right of first refusal on voting rights associated with," he named the shares as if naming a river, "which gives this block a controlling interest pending this meeting's formal acknowledgement." "Pending?" the new owner snapped. "Pending meaning the law likes a light shined on things," the quiet lawyer said. "We're shining it now." Silence bloomed. The banker cleared his throat. "I brought a note," he said, and the junior counsel next to him already looked ill. The new owner's jaw flexed. "This is a stunt." "We purchased in good faith." "Then you'll welcome good light," I said. I nodded to Maria. She placed the pension memo on the table. Eddie placed the email printouts. The union steward placed a list, names of men and women near retirement whose checks were about to be optimized into smoke. The corporate secretary shifted in his chair. He was old enough to remember when Frank first put that clause in the bylaws. He stared at the paper as if the letters might rearrange themselves into a more comfortable story. "We need to review," he said, but his voice didn't reach his eyes. "There will be a vote," I said, "on rescinding the pension freeze, on halting the asset auction, on removing any officer who knowingly misrepresented the company's obligations to its employees." One of the suits tried a smile. "Let's not be dramatic." Dramatic is a locked gate on a Friday afternoon and a sign that says closed. Dramatic is a man opening his refrigerator and counting the eggs because a promise was turned into a line item. This is not drama, this is math and memory. The new owner stood. "I will not be spoken to like this in my own—" "You said that to the wrong room," I cut in. The room did what rooms do when someone says the thing no one wants to admit. It exhaled. "You bought the shell," I said. "You didn't buy the spine." He looked at the lawyer on his left. "We'll sue." "You may," the quiet lawyer said, "but first you'll vote." We voted. The pension freeze was rescinded. The asset auction was canceled. The removal of any officer who had authorized the freeze without board approval passed by a margin that left the new owner paler than the table. He tried to salvage dignity. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You're saving a relic. The market rewards speed. The market will reward a company that ships product on time because its people know their hands matter," I said. "You want speed? Try loyalty." He reached for the badge still in his pocket, perhaps to throw it back at me with a line he'd rehearsed. I held up my palm. "Keep it," I said. "A souvenir." If this is where stories usually end, with a villain walked out and a cheer in the belly of the building, then this is where life insisted on more pages. Because justice isn't a switch you flip. It's a relay you solder and then test under load. The following weeks were a test. We had cash to manage, contracts to calm, rumors to smother. Men who had smiled at the new owner suddenly smiled at me like nothing had happened. I didn't punish them. I assigned them work and watched. People reveal themselves twice. If you miss it the first time, you'll catch the echo. I called a meeting in the same room where I'd been fired. No glossy slides. Just a whiteboard, a marker, and the sound of boots under chairs. We are not saints and we are not suckers, I said. We are builders. That means we will fix what needs fixing, including ourselves. I appointed Maria head of operations with authority to override production quotas if she heard a machine cry. I moved Ricky to training. His limp didn't slow his eye. I asked the union steward to sit in on weekly safety rounds. Nothing reported there would be used in discipline. We reinstated apprenticeships and tied bonuses to safety metrics and quality, not just output. We opened the ledger to the Employee Trust Committee. People who had been treated like replaceable parts suddenly saw the schematic. They acted like owners because they were. The fund tried to sue. The banker's note and the old clause and the recorded documents held like good weld. Their case fizzled without air. A reporter called. I didn't grandstand. I said, "We run machines. We keep promises." The story didn't trend. That was fine. Mountains don't trend. They just stand. There was one more act of justice I wanted, and it wasn't to see the new owner humiliated on television. It was to make sure his kind knew there were places their kind couldn't quietly harvest. We filed our clause with a renewed notice, clear as a bell. We sent letters to suppliers and customers explaining, not boasting, what had happened. We renewed the trust with a vote of the people who would benefit from it. We added a clause of our own. Any leader could be removed for choosing speed over safety without showing cause. That made some younger managers squirm. They learned to sit still. I still see the new owner now and then. He opened a glass office across town where the furniture looks like a magazine and the coffee tastes like a password. He once nodded at me from across a street. I nodded back. I didn't hate him. Hate is a bad tool. It skids and strips. I had something better. Memory and a tightened bolt and a room full of people who could hear a misalignment before a stopwatch did. A year after the board meeting, Frank's widow came to the plant for the first time since his funeral. We walked the floor. Men lifted their chins. She put a hand on the warm side of the press like a woman greeting an old friend. He would have liked this, she said. The quiet way? The only way that lasts, I said. I thought then of the morning they fired me, the way the badge looked on the table like a coin, the way the young man's eyes went wide when the math turned against him, the way I felt the bubble in the level move back to center. On Fridays now, I still walk past the lobby pictures. I see the kid daring the world, the man with grease in his lines, the older man with patience in his stance. I'm still here for a reason that is not stubbornness. It is love, though men our age don't say it like that. We say, I'll stop by on Saturday to look at that noise. We say, take your time, then take less. We say, when you can feel it, you don't need to see it. In the end, justice wasn't fireworks. It was a pay stub with numbers that made sense. It was a pension check that arrived on the first of the month and didn't bounce like someone's conscience. It was a gate that opened on Monday morning and a smell of oil that said we still had work. It was a boardroom that learned who really owned the place, the people whose names were on the lockers, the ones who remembered birthdays, the ones who signed the trust not with ink, but with years. And it was a man old enough to be underestimated, standing in the doorway of his own life, asked to leave and choosing instead to invite everyone back in. So yes, they fired me. And yes, I was already the owner. But the thing I'm proudest of isn't the twist. It's the steady hand that turned it from theater into law, from surprise into protection. If you've given half a century to a place, and someone young and certain tells you your time has passed, ask yourself a different question. What did you build that outlives you? If the answer is only a title, be careful with your heart. If the answer is a promise tied to other people, you'll have all the leverage you need when the hour comes. The board of directors was interesting that day. But what mattered most happened after the vote, when the meeting dissolved into a hum and the doors opened and the smell of metal and oil came in like weather, reminding us all what the building was for. We went back to work. We built. We kept our word. And the clock moved forward at the only speed that ever made sense here. Human.
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales stories like this, hit subscribe.